the goal? Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
Hello, everyone. So we're back, raring to go into December, the slugfest, after the final international break of the calendar year, and ready to zoom in after last week's broader look at the wider landscape, focusing on the fixtures ahead, as well as looking into some key priorities facing us pretty much immediately in FPL, as it hits fast forwards and jumps 4 game weeks in just 2 calendar weeks. I'm Tom. I'm here with a beer. Still got a cough, but it's receding. Definitely aggravated by seeing the streets last Thursday with Nick, but honestly, one of the best gigs I've ever been to. So I'll take it. I'll take being hoarse afterwards. It was unreal. Anyway, let's turn the page on the day, walk away from this international break. I'm joined by Sam, as always. You all right?
Yeah, very well, thanks. I had a mini cough cold over the weekend, so I was worried that we'd both be a bit hoarse coming into this, but I seem to have recovered over the international break over the weekend as well. And I'm actually joining you here with a beer for the first time in quite a while as well. So a reason to celebrate.
Exciting.
So, as always, we are Who Got the Assist. On today's pod, as Tom briefly mentioned, we'll be having a bit of a zoom in, I guess, on the next few weeks. I think last week we had a bit of a zoom out. We're back under the microscope this week. We're zooming back into the congested period ahead and how we can best position ourselves ahead of that fixture crunch that's coming, not this game week, but from 14 into 16. And then we have another crunch period coming up around Christmas as well. So we're going to be going through our own teams under the microscope and offering some planning assistance to all of you out there through the lens of our own teams, but also hopefully that will be able to help you out as well if you're listening to the show. Bold claims and listener Q&A will come shortly after that, as always. And as it stands right now, we're on 20th of November, international break. We've got a handful of injuries, but nothing too major, barring 1 or 2, which we'll discuss on the pod. And I'll hand it back over to Tom to quickly reflect on the scores of the doors from the last game week.
Yeah. So if you did tune out last week and you weren't interested, didn't want to know about FPL anymore for a little while, we'll just run through our teams kind of in a bit more detail than how we did. And do check that pod out because it's a bit of kind of evergreen. It's not going to be affected by the international break shenanigans. It's all about the last 12 weeks and stuff. So do head back to that. But in terms of how we did a couple of weekends ago now, I got 88 gross, 84 net. Shimikas 15-pointer, the key man, and brought in Ben White, who didn't play, which is incredibly annoying for Porro, who did actually return. So I got Kabore off the bench. I brought Son back too. Again, it didn't really kind of work out, but Captain Salah, Shimikas, and Bowen returning, as well as kind of Haaland and Watkins, the higher owned players. So a slight green arrow, I think, of kind of 600-ish K, and now to 427K as we go into the slugfest, as I mentioned. And Sam, you weren't very far behind at all.
Not at all. So I didn't take the hit. So net gain of the exact same amount of points, 84. The one regret, I suppose, is Tsimikas stuck on the bench for his haul. But as we discussed last week on the pod, I was fairly happy with the decision-making behind that. The outcome just didn't favour me. But on the other hand, overall, a very positive week. Brought in Saliba, got the 9 points off of him, and Captain Salah for 32 points as well, even though Haaland also got 16. All very, very positive. Went into the international break with a pretty significant green arrow like you did, up to 618K now. So I think kind of back on track, and hopefully with the next period of congested fixtures coming thick and fast, we can hopefully put some consecutive greens in place and start really rising up the ranks over the next few game weeks.
Nice one. Well, as you just mentioned, Sam, last week was a review pod, and this week is a preview. We're going to look at the upcoming period, because I think you have to kind of start to plan now, don't you? Because in not very long there are going to be game weeks where it's literally the next day when you were back in again with a deadline, and it's good to kind of have a plan in place, I think, before you head into the maelstrom of that, lest you start frenzying, making poor decisions. It's always worthwhile just having a look at what's to come. And I think kind of contemplate returns this week, asking the question, is it simply a week to roll to set us up for the congested period ahead? The big asterisk to that, normally I'd be yes, absolutely. But the big asterisk to that is obviously some international news from the international break. So Sam, we've seen Haaland, who's got a flag. We'll talk about that in the questions as well. But I think that's one that obviously, unless he's really, really injured, I can't see him missing Liverpool. Bowen withdrawing from the international duty due to injury. There were some rumours floating around about him, but we're not going to be commenting on those. It's just we'll see what happens when he's had his scan. And finally, Andy Naylor, in terms of FPL relevant ones, the Athletic Brighton correspondent said that Matoma is likely to miss the Forest game for the weekend. And there's some other niche ones floating around, like Evan Ferguson being injured for Ireland, but that will only affect a few people. But yeah, obviously those are kind of fairly substantial injuries, especially if Bowen and Matoma happen to be out, because it will mean that kind of the pro template proposition of rolling, barring injury, gets kind of blown out of the water, and we move on to the contemplate idea of kind of proactive planning, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. So with those three in mind, those are probably the only FPL relevant ones as it stands. I think one of them we can probably assume is going to be okay in Haaland's case. I think we've got a question later on about international break injuries, so I won't reflect on it too much now, but I think it's kind of situational. And Liverpool's too big a game to take a risk with a meaningless international game that Norway wouldn't have had anything riding on anyway. So I'd assume that hopefully that one's fine. Bowen is a little bit more of a question mark. We need to wait for more news there. And Matoma, obviously, in the same position, around the same sort of price point, means that potentially quite a few managers out there might have a decision to make regarding some sort of midfielder around that price. And obviously, we've all got our own ideas of who that might be at the moment. But for the time being, I think it's safer to just hold firm, wait for additional context, additional news to come out through the press conferences, through the midweek. And of course, we haven't actually finished all the international fixtures yet either. So you could always be sort of sideswiped by another injury later in the week as well. Obviously, England are playing tonight whilst we're recording. So who knows? Maybe even Ollie Watkins goes off injured halfway through or something. So curveballs do happen. So it's important not to react too early and just take all of that information, put it to one side ahead of the deadline, and make an informed decision when we've got everything together and we can actually interpret the data properly.
Absolutely. Great. Well, that aside, with all that sort of in mind, and the pro template and the contemplate questions, we thought we'd look through the next few fixtures to try to inform ourselves a bit about what's going on in the near future as congestion comes thick and fast. So on the screen, if you're watching on YouTube, are the upcoming fixtures for all of the teams. Not going to go through them all this week. Did that last week in terms of the underlying data, but we are going to preview a few because in terms of that proactive planning, especially if you do have to make a move this week, surely you want to be making a move for a player who is likely to have good fixtures, especially in that congestion period between 14 and 16, where we do have 3 game weeks in 7 days. So, I mean, on the screen, you've got the hub analyzer and Fans Football Hub's transfer fixture ticker, how well they think the next sort of 6 fixtures are going to be. Other fixture tickers are available, of course, and there are a few highlighted in purple, which we'll talk through for those listening. In terms of teams who have the best 14 to 16, rest depending, of course. And I think, Sam, just to kind of reflect on everything really before we sort of dive into it, this is always such a fun period, isn't it? Like it does have some sort of negative memories for me, because I remember kind of just making terrible decisions. There's the year when I sold Mo Salah 1 week, and then before Bournemouth away, and then he went on to score a hat trick. There's also kind of, it reminds me of kind of a Project Restart when you had games just drip feeding through. But away from that, it's always very exciting, isn't it? And you were saying just offline earlier, this is like literally your favorite part of the year.
Yeah, this is why I love FPL so much. It's games pretty much every day. It can snowball in 2 ways. So obviously forgive the winter pun there, but it can go one of 2 ways. If you're stood at the top of the mountain, imagining the start of this fixture run coming, if you get on a good roll, if you're going down the correct path, then the transfers kind of make themselves week after week, and you can kind of get on a bit of a roll with the decisions favoring you. However, at this point now, this is why it's so important to do a podcast like this at this point, because if you head down the wrong path, the wrong strategy, and put yourself a move or 2 behind not necessarily the template forming, but the team that you want to get to forming over the next few game weeks, then it can snowball in completely the wrong way. And you might end up having to take hits to get out of a bit of a conundrum, because games are coming thick and fast. Injuries can pile up, or players who are seemingly not reliable 90-minute men anymore could become real issues in your team very quickly, because if you've got a game in midweek, then there's all the chance in the world that they get rotated out then as well. So it's really important at this point to nail down your strategy, figure out what the issues are in your side and where you think you might need to correct course before we get into quite a difficult patch of the season if you get it wrong. On the flip side, it is great fun. We all love playing FPL because we love the Premier League, we love football, and there's a lot of games to come. So hopefully, if you stay engaged, if you stay on top of it, this is going to be a really fruitful period for anyone listening. But yeah, just a word of warning at the start. Just make sure you get your planning in place and you make this winter period as fruitful as possible.
And in terms of what you just said about players being rotated out, rotated in, how would you position the importance of having a strong bench here, especially for those of us with, I don't know, Kabore, Taylor and Archer as their bench? I mean, how effed are we?
So I think it is very situational week to week. So you've got to really have a look at your team with a fixture ticker sort of correlated to it. So I have my own personal one I just have on an Excel sheet somewhere, and I just map out, especially 14 to 16, who are my bench players those weeks and how bad is it if they come off my bench. So we're going to look ahead at 14, 15 and 16 in particular, because that's the week where there are 3 fixtures in 7 days. 14 for a lot of us is not going to be an issue. It seems like it might because it's the start of this busy period. But looking at my side, if I get 1 or 2 players randomly benched, randomly rotated out, I've got Taylor and Archer. So 2 of the 3 that you mentioned there that you would think on the surface you might be a little bit screwed. But actually, looking at 14, Burnley go up against Sheffield United at home, and Sheffield United obviously have the away fixture against Burnley as well. So both of those players have decent prospects against teams that are around their sort of level. So you'd expect them to do fairly all right in those games. So I wouldn't be too worried about them coming off my bench that week. Kabore, who's Luton got? Brentford away from home. Not ideal, but it's not an absolute nightmare. But then it's game week 15 where I'd say that's where a bench and having a bit of depth there would be really helpful. So you've got Sheffield United against Liverpool, not ideal at all. Burnley, so if you've got Taylor, you've got Wolves away from home. Not amazing, probably not the worst thing in the world, but I think Wolves are a significant step up from Burnley, and I'd expect them to score if you've got the likes of Taylor on your bench. And then the final one, Luton, if you've got the likes of Kabore, sadly have Arsenal. So I'd say 15 is the problem here. And then 16 also isn't fantastic either. Luton have Man City, for example. So I think 14, you're probably safe. You can probably still make your maneuvers in 13 and 14. And then 15 is probably where you want to batten down the hatches. Make sure you've got at least 1 or 2 pretty reliable picks locked on your bench just in case rotation does strike, because it's always the players you least expect that will just randomly get a rest in midweek. Yeah. So yeah, I think 15's the issue here. 14 I'm not so worried about.
Yeah, you're right. And Luton 16, Man City at home. Like if you've got Kabore coming off the bench, and even arguably Sheffield United with Archer, Brentford at home. That fixture. So it's not great. Burnley actually have the best fixtures according to the Hub Analyzer for the next 6 weeks. I mean, this is just on paper. Obviously, if you apply your brain, you can kind of mitigate that a little bit. And they're 3: Sheffield United home, Wolves away, and Brighton away, as you mentioned, the first 2, which isn't fantastic, but it's okay. So if you do own Taylor, that's it's all right. Yeah, you're not well. Maybe against Brighton, you'd be expecting kind of a few more goals, but other than that, you'd be hoping for just the 2-pointer. But in terms of the rotation, just to kind of dive into these teams a little bit. that 15 in particular, so the midweek game, will
Mm.
impact two of the teams that I think will be kind of really salivating over the fixture for in game week 15, and that's Arsenal, whose 3 is Wolves, Luton, and Aston Villa. Luton and Aston Villa both being away, and Liverpool, who have got Fulham at home, Sheffield United away, and Crystal Palace away. And that Sheffield United away and that Luton away for those two teams are sat in game week 15. And I think, I don't know whether we're not going to be scaremongering about potential Mo Salah rest or potential Saka rest. But I think, if you do own, like me, Martinelli, or you do own kind of, Darwin Nunez, then I'm sure there's going to be cause for concern there, Sam. Maybe that kind of feeds into what you were saying about the bench. I suppose we're kind of, it's the point where it's going to be a tough decision to make whether you either kind of just I think you're probably gonna have to play them and just hope for a 1-pointer and hope they don't play at all, right? It's probably gonna be a situation where if you do get a random benching in these times, you have to just be aware that you're likely to have to kind of take a 1-pointer on the chin, I suppose. In terms of those two teams, like, how worried are you about benchings? I guess it's kind of Salah and Saka nailed, the rest question mark.
Yeah, I think especially with Liverpool in particular, I'd be quite worried to own Darwin, for instance, for that 15 fixture. I think over the stretch, you're probably still happy with him because the minutes that he'll get over a stretch of fixtures will be good enough to still get the returns. But if we're really magnifying in on game week 15 here, I would say that is probably a pretty good time to be resting someone like Darwin or rotating to playing maybe Gakpo up front or Jota up front, for instance. And they do have a fantastic amount of depth and players that will be begging to play in that Sheffield United game. So I can definitely see some rotation coming in there. Arsenal, I would say less so. I think Martinelli is probably 50-50 at this point. I'd still expect him to get minutes, and Luton away from home, even if he comes on in the last 20, I don't think that's a complete catastrophe. But again, it's one of those players that when you look across your starting 11 heading into game week 14 and 15, you want as many 90-minute men as possible, as few rotation risks as you can, because even if you do have seemingly 11 90-minute men on your pitch, in your starting 11 rather, there's still going to be one that just shocks you out of nowhere and just gets rotated at some point. So I think just try and play it as safe as you can. I think Darwin and Martinelli are two players that you would almost have to take a longer view and say, fine, I can stomach a 1-pointer in game week 15 potentially, in the hope that actually along the stretch they're still going to be worth the money. But I think especially in Martinelli's case, there are enough options elsewhere that are explosive at his sort of price point and below that I'd be tempted to probably move off of him ahead of game week 15.
Really?
I think there are players elsewhere that I'd be quite tempted in. I think we'll mention two of them later in this pod as well, but that are perhaps on penalties, for instance. Perhaps they're getting 90 minutes every week, and the team that they play for, they are the talisman. They are probably the most important players in that team, whereas Martinelli does have a ready-made replacement in Trossard, for example, that could easily start at least one of those three between 14 and 16. It depends on your attitude to how explosive you think Martinelli is, I suppose. But Arsenal as well, we won't go into it too much this pod, but Arsenal haven't been as explosive as we expected them to this season. Either haven't actually blown teams away too often. So maybe moving away from that additional secondary Arsenal player, if you have got Saka, for instance, might not be such a bad thing. Luton is away as well, even if Martinelli did start. Luton at home haven't actually been that horrendous. They've kept it tighter at home than they have done away from home. So maybe that's slightly tougher than it looks on paper. I still don't expect Arsenal to particularly struggle, but maybe don't expect them to blow Luton away. Maybe it's a little bit more of a cagey affair.
Yeah, and I think to also mention Shimikas here, who is perhaps more of a problem as a defender. I mean, I think Arsenal defenders, as a Ben White owner, I'm slightly regretting that, because I think you see Saliba, you probably see Gabriel playing all those games. With White, I don't know. With Shimikas, I don't think With White, it's kind of maybe. With Tsimikas, I think it's kind of a fairly solid no that he'll be playing at those 3 games: Fulham, Sheffield United, and Crystal Palace. And I think that kind of player, if you do own him, and I know he did sell last week, but if you do own him, he's probably one that you're probably looking at what happens in 14, and then in 15, say he plays the 90 versus Fulham or plays the 60 or something like that, and then you'll be kind of sizing up what the hell you do in 15, because do you really want, if you do own, like me, Kabore and Taylor, do you want to be kind of making the choice between hoping Tsimikas comes on for 20 minutes against Sheffield United, or Luton, Arsenal at home, as you mentioned earlier, or Wolves away for Burnley? And as I agree with you, what you said earlier, that you'd assume Wolves win that one fairly comfortably. So it's definitely a question that's going to be a bit of a head scratcher for loads of people, and it might be one where you kind of start to look elsewhere and think, okay, could that be a player that I'd move on if you're not happy with your alternatives as well, or do I invest in bench cover elsewhere too? I mean, you're right. It's definitely a period where you're going to be looking at it, and there's a lot of head scratching to be done, I suppose, over the next little while. I mean, there are a couple of kind of cheaper alternatives in terms of teams that you could back. I guess maybe if you're thinking about the Tsimikas question, there is West Ham, but I think a lot of us do own Areola. They've got Crystal Palace, Spurs, and Fulham. The last 2 games being away, 3 London derbies in a row. I mean, I don't know whether you've sold a Gerd recently. I'm not sure when people have the stomach to go back to double West Ham defence, especially. There's also Fulham, who've got Liverpool away in 14, so maybe that would be kind of when you kind of look at what's going on in Tsimikas. They've got 2 home games, Nottingham Forest and West Ham at home. They are difficult to beat, as James from Planet FPL always says, and they are doing better than we expected in terms of the SGC ranking. I think they were 15th, which is not great, but better than expected. And then you've also got Nottingham Forest, who are genuinely doing better than expected in terms of SGC. They're 11th overall, which is quite good for a couple of their stature, who have, again, probably one of the better 3 games within that run. There's one more team which we will talk about in a minute, but Everton at home, Fulham away, and Wolves away, very kind of defensively sound away. But the problem is, as we discussed last week, is that which defenders you back, because it's just kind of Murillo, I think, who's been playing every single one. Other than that, it's kind of just been a bit of a pick and mix for Steve Cooper. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely. I think it, as you said earlier, it's all about kind of that 14, gathering some information at 14, be it whether you've got 1 free transfer or 2, depending on what's going on with the midfielders who are injured, if you own one of them that we mentioned earlier on, and then making a decision after that. There's also Wolves, for example, who have got Burnley at home and Forest at home in 15 and 16. So big Craig Dawson, for example, could feature in a few teams. Who knows? It's tricky, isn't it, really, to kind of pick out what you do with a player like Tsimikas in this sort of situation.
Yeah, I mean, if you fancy praying that to some sort of FPL god that he starts that 15 fixture, that would be fantastic. But yeah, what I think it is really important that the game week 15 fixture for whoever you're going to potentially replace Tsimikas with, if you are tempted to get rid of him, is looking good. That 15 fixture is the one that you probably do need that depth for. I think the added bonus for some of the teams, Nottingham Forest being one here, if you could pick a starting defender for Nottingham Forest, then their run not only in 14 to 16 is really good, but also crucially game week 18, when obviously we're potentially going to be relying a little bit more on depth that week because of the blanks for Brentford and Man City. They've got Bournemouth at home that game week. So that could actually be really helpful if you can trust one of the Nottingham Forest defenders. Now, as we mentioned, obviously Murillo is probably the only one that is starting regularly at the moment. So maybe that's the answer, but I'm not sure I have quite enough trust built up yet to be diving on a Nottingham Forest defender just at this point. It is tough. I mean, you could potentially even double up on the Arsenal defence if you've got that 3rd slot ready and available. But even then, I still feel like that's a transfer out waiting to happen with game week 18 away at Liverpool. Again, we're going to be relying quite heavily on depth that week, so that might not be ideal. And then after game week 15 for Arsenal, it's Villa away and Brighton at home. so it's not fantastic long term. So 15 might unfortunately just be one of those weeks where we just take a little bit of a low score defensively on the chin, and maybe Tsimikas is a hit and hope for those 3 weeks. Hope he starts 2 rather than 1 of that period between 14 and 16, and hope the accumulation of points is enough that it makes it worthwhile over any of the alternatives out there. Because to be honest, there aren't too many that I'm massively tempted by as it stands.
Yeah, I think there'll also be some who look at, for example, Crystal Palace and see they've got Bournemouth at home and think, oh, that's a great defensive fixture for them. I'm going to go there. But as discussed last week, they then run into probably the worst run of many teams: Liverpool, Man City, Brighton, Chelsea, Brentford, Arsenal. So you'd be buying a player for 1 week to go and sit on your bench, which is fine if you're kind of strengthening. But I think you'd kind of be locking more money away on your bench for a player who you're not going to be interested in fielding at all. So
Yeah.
I'd be unsure about that. There is one team though sort of out there, which is obviously Brentford, to take the defence first. Luton, Bristol, Brighton, and Sheffield United, that 3, with Villa in 17 and the blank in 18, where maybe you kind of be looking at Pinnock sort of character. Steady, consistent Pinnock. Nathan Collins, I think, is 4.5 as well. Could be another one who could come in for you there, perhaps. But yeah, that blank in 18, as we discussed last week, is probably going to be a bit of a problem. Moving on to midfielders, though, who are probably going to be kind of the main sort of source of most people's kind of questions. In the cheaper sort of price range, I think there's 2, maybe 3 that we should really be looking at. Morgan Gibbs-White at Forest, as you mentioned, a fairly long horizon of good fixtures. 44th so far in terms of the non-pen XGI, which is nothing to write home about. And he also has missed a game. I think it was against Cooper, or didn't start a game when Cooper said it was because he was a bit tired. But it's worth noting that Forest has some tough games so far. Liverpool, Chelsea, City, Villa, United, and Arsenal have all been played in the opening 12. So half their games have been fairly stinky. So he could be one that, if you are looking for a punt or you already own Mbumo, who of course we're going to speak about in a second, you could be really interested in. West Ham, if Bowen is out, there's Kudos there as well, who is very good to the eye. Not worth talking about his days yet because he's fairly new to the league, but another one who could be worth a look at. The West Ham fixtures over the 3 are okay. As I mentioned, those 3 sort of London derbies. The fixture run does become a bit more middling kind of over Christmas time. Yes, Mbumo the man. I feel like, Sam, if you do see that Bowen is out, and people who have got Miss Homer and have got a little money in the bank, I think most people are going to be, even though they've got Arsenal at home this week, I feel like those people are going to be going to Mbumo, because those fixtures, penalty taker, as we spoke about last week, ridiculously high in terms of the XGI as well. It feels like he's sort of tailor made for this sort of period with the X-Mins to go with it.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a slide prepared on Mbumo as well, so I'll just flick over to that for the time being, whilst we chat about him. Now, Mbumo is a really interesting option. Obviously, the underlying data is still absolutely fantastic. He went off the boil for a little while, so a lot of us sold him, but obviously back-to-back double-digit returns put the magnifying glass back on him, got an assist, I think, the following week, and then blanked against Liverpool, which, again, maybe people have called on him slightly, but that blank against Liverpool, the data was absolutely fantastic. Clocked over 0.5 XG in that match. I think another 0.4 in XA. Against a team like Liverpool is no mean feat either. So Mbumo, still very good value for money, great fixtures to come, and I think the earlier you do hop on him, the more benefit you'll get out of him as well, because we do have that blank to consider in game week 18. And I think there's no real doubt that he is the most important Brentford player to own. So if you're going to hop on one, it's going to be Mbumo, and you definitely want to have him by game week 14 if you want to have him at all. Otherwise, the fixtures do run out very quickly, and every week you wait is another week closer to having to potentially bench him in game week 18 or transfer him out again to mitigate against a really, well, not weak side necessarily, but a very light side in terms of depth. So yeah, Mbumo for me is very high on the radar. It's just a matter of, whether I need to make that move this week for the likes of Jared Bowen, who could or could not be injured, for instance, or if you are listening to this pod and have Mitoma in your side, it looks more likely that he is actually going to be injured. So if you've got the spare money, maybe you dive on him early. Again, even against Arsenal, they'll play a high line, he'll get in behind, and those sort of matches are tailor-made for Mbeumo and Brentford as well in general. So he could easily benefit from that Arsenal game, even though on the fixture ticker it doesn't look the most favourable. It might not be the worst time to actually dive on him ahead of other people kind of catching you up next game week in 14. So yeah, I'm very, very hot on him at the moment. It's just whether or not this week is the week for me, because I don't have Mitoma. It's basically Bowen out for him, and I'm only going to do that if Bowen's injured, and I'm not going to sell Bowen ahead of Burnley away from home if he is going to play that game.
Yeah, certainly. This is worth noting, of course, that Bumo will go away with Cameroon after game week 20.
Yeah.
But after they come back from game week 18, they've got Wolves and Palace. There's a mooted double, I believe, as well around that time potentially. So it kind of feels like he's one that I know there's some who are just kind of like, well, those games actually can be quite difficult for Brentford because of how they play. Not difficult, but not really tailor-made for Brentford, and it's kind of the opposite of what you said. But I feel like it's one where, given the fixtures and given the player, in terms of the underlying data, fourth for XG, fourth for non-pen XGI, fourth for goals and assists as well this season, 6 goals, 3 assists, and a decent-ish top 10 for non-pen XGI per 90. It's not, for me, it's one you don't overthink, but you're right. It's kind of one you have to get in on early, because I think we're looking at a player who's not the most exciting player in the world in some ways. Exciting because of the points he's potentially going to get, but not exciting because he's going to be a cover pick, essentially, which is not the most sort of sexy thing to be espousing, but nonetheless a player that you should all have on your radars, in my view. There's also Johan Wisser, who's coming up all right in the data. He's 14th at the moment for non-pen XGI. So if you are looking to move a striker on, then maybe he could be the way you maybe kind of go. Not 100% sure about him in terms of a choice that would probably be made, as I would kind of fancy Solanke a little bit more. Bournemouth's fixtures over the next 6 are pretty good, and taking Sheffield United away, Luton at home, there is the Villa at home fixture in 14, United away in 16, but he's a talisman 90-minute man, and I think that he would probably be my choice over Wisser if I was looking to move on a forward. But it does feel like, for me at least, Bumo is the one, and it almost, for me, I know obviously we don't wish injuries on anybody, but if Bowen's injured, or if you're a Mitoma owner and you can afford Bumo, yes, I know it's Arsenal, but it's a game that Brentford do they always excel in the kind of the bigger games, I suppose, and it kind of feels like it's almost a blessing in disguise, isn't it? Because it kind of makes the decision less difficult, because I'd have been selling Bowen ahead of a decent trio if I was going to go with Bumo. But now, if Bowen's not going to be fit, then it becomes academic, and it may become academic for loads of people, so I don't want to dwell on this for too long. But I do want to ask Sam about this kind of 90-minute men question. So we touched on it a little bit, with, you said the likes of Martinelli, for example, would be a player that you'd sell, which we'll come on to in a second when we look at our own teams and diagnose what we could possibly do to tool up for the 3. And I think you tweeted as well recently that 90-minute men are just becoming incredibly important, especially around this period. What's the sort of balance you strike between puntiness and caution throughout this period? I guess it is, if you had a player whose ceiling is really high versus a player whose floor is really high, I guess you'd be all about the floor.
Yeah, I guess I kind of would at this point in the season. I think there are times to attack in FPL, and there are times to almost defend a little bit. And this period, because of how quickly the games come thick and fast, could be seen as an opportunity to attack for some, because there are players that maybe would be on the peripheral usually that are going to get increased minutes because of rotation working in their favor. But I think for me personally, I like to have as many 90-minute men as possible. Obviously, having great underlying data is just as important, but there are usually enough players out there within the price points I need to fill out an 11 full of players that I'm pretty happy will get 90 minutes most weeks, if not 70 plus, 80 plus every single week. They're important enough to the side that it feels almost nonsensical for their manager to bench them unless they absolutely need to get a rest. And then if I can load up on as many of them as possible, then it mitigates against the risk of rotation as much as physically possible. And then my bench can be there with quite a light bench, really, a 4.5 Archer, a couple of 4.0 defenders. And I can rely on them because I still have mapped out the fixtures and I still have enough faith in them that in specific weeks they'll be okay. Archer, for instance, in game week 14 might not be the worst thing in the world, for instance. But also, I've saved as much money on my bench as possible and put that into my starting 11, getting as much value out of it by having players that I have a lot more faith in than players. Again, nothing against Martinelli or Darwin. I love them both as picks, but I think for the next 3 weeks, I'd be looking at that side every single week and be nervous about whether or not they start the game. And that's just not the way I like to play the game at this point in the season. I like to have more confidence in my starting 11 actually getting the minutes. Darwin might be the one exception where I'd just be like, you know what? He'll start 2 of the 3. He'll get 30 minutes in the other one, whichever one that is. And he's so explosive. The data is that good that it actually outweighs the fact that he will get reduced minutes at some point. So it is a balancing act. You do almost weigh up the upside versus the rotation risk. But I think I usually favor as many minutes as possible. And I think there are enough picks out there who are getting very good underlying data and are in most cases on penalties as well, by the sounds of it, in terms of the interesting picks for this week, that I'd be pretty confident in diving on them and hopefully getting 3 starts out of them in the next 4 fixtures. Well, in the 14 to 16 fixtures.
That's good. So, I mean, Noli asked the best punt over the next 3. Some people will be in this boat where if you already own Mbumo and need to replace Matoma, so you don't own Bowen. So, judging by your answer there, I guess, I know it's a bit kind of unfashionable, a player who's not really quite in the meta at the moment, but maybe Gibbs White would be the one then, really, because he does have that kind of, he does have the minutes. The only kind of slight concern would be that Cooper has at one point rested him this season, saying that he played too many minutes thus far, but maybe he'd be the one that you'd be kind of looking at around that sort of period. Maybe if Pedro Neto's back, but I mean, it's a bit of a dicey game. Will Hwang, with his kind of long-term injury sort of prospects, be one of those players? When they've got three very good fixtures in the next 4: Fulham away, Burnley at home, and Forest at home. But I suppose you probably be looking at Gibbs White if you were kind of punting it out or looking for an alternative to kind of fill that slot. And there is our man Anthony Gordon as well. As you've said several times, Newcastle do have sort of good long-term fixtures. If not over the next 4, where they've got Chelsea at home, United at home, and Spurs away, and are kind of light on bodies. But yeah, I mean, I guess there are sort of those options out there. There's maybe even a Douglas Luiz sort of thing, even though it's Spurs away this week, which I think some of those are goals will come on some bold claims. Bournemouth in 14, and then they've got City and Arsenal, which isn't great. But they've got that kind of all-important Sheffield United at home in 18 when there's the blank for Brentford and Man City. So there are a few options out there. Right, shall we have a look at our teams then?
Let's do
Thinking
it.
about the priorities that we've sort of started to come forward with. Yes, it is about our teams, but hopefully these are things which are we're fairly template, albeit that I seem to be, according to Sertalps, similar to you, analyzer. I'm apparently copying Sam this year,
Even though you're ahead of me.
Yeah, I got. So you can put your team into this thing. I'll link it on the pod on the X, and you can put your team into it, and basically it tells you which content creator your team is most like and who's made similar moves. And I got, guess who? FPL Pricey, the guru that I'm apparently following in FPL this year. So yeah, our teams are fairly template, but I think it's kind of quite good then to look at these sort of potential priorities because, Sam, you've said it's worth getting 1 or 2 reliable picks lots on your bench. I've got a bit of a problem there, having that Archer, Kabore, and Taylor triumvirate. Don't have Mbumo quite yet, but Bowen, if he is injured, is going to be kind of how I get there, obviously. And there's also Cole Palmer, who probably isn't quite for the next 3 weeks, but is a player who is obviously going to be increasingly in the template going forward, especially when Chelsea embark on that really, really good run coming up from game week 16, I'm going to say, up until kind of January time, maybe even February, when it's kind of a sea of green. Apart from, I think there's a Liverpool fixture in there somewhere, but that's not going to be too worrying from a defensive point of view. So my team at the moment, I've got Areola stuck in goal. Cash, I'm playing Kabore this week because I've got Shimikas, who's on the bench. So Kabore's got Crystal Palace at home. They'll give him a game. Ben White in midfield, I've got Bowen, Gordon, Martinelli, Salah, and Son. Up front, I've got Haaland and Watkins. We'll leave the captain until later on. And on the bench, Materno, who gives a crap. Archer ready to come on in case there's an absentee. Shimikas, and then Taylor. And I think it's worth thinking about the priorities really here. Because if I do make a move this week, it's likely to be Burns and Bumo. I don't think, even though the fixture is quite good, I don't think I want to kind of manage with having Archer playing and then rolling the transfer, and pretty much everybody else is going to be buying in Bumo. I might as well just get that done now. So I guess kind of what would the priority for you be here, Sam? Would it be kind of, assuming I do kind of do Bumo this week or do Bumo next week as part of 2 free transfers, or this week as a free transfer, would the next thing be for you to sort out the bench? Or would you be thinking, oh, you've got to get Palmer in for Martinelli? Because I know earlier on, I've got Martinelli. I know you were saying earlier on, he's one that you'd have a major question mark over. What would be kind of the way you kind of look at this going forward? How would you kind of prioritize?
Yeah, so I think you're completely right in saying Mbumo's probably the number one. So we can kind of get that out of the way. I think that's probably the first of the 3 main priorities there. I think the difference between my side and your side is mainly the bench depth. Because I have the extra 4.5. Well, I don't actually. I've switched it down to a Lascelles, but I'm fairly comfortable that Lascelles represents the value of a 4.5 defender. He's more playable week in, week out than Kabore is anyway. So I think in your instance, the bench depth probably needs to get sorted out prior to attacking with getting in Cole Palmer, for instance. Now, Palmer, I think there are 2 hopping on points. I think you could either go for 14 when they play Brighton. I think that's a great time to be diving on him then, and I might do that. Or you can wait until 16. And I think in your case, I think you'd be better served by sorting out Mbumo first, then looking at your bench depth ahead of game week 15. As we mentioned earlier on in the show, that's going to be a bit of a nightmare for bench cover. Obviously, it's a midweek fixture, and some of the games that your bench cover have that week could be problematic, and you've got Tsimikas in there as well. So I'd say game week 15/14 if you do the Mbumo move this week instead. That could be the next priority after that, and then you could probably wait until game week 16 to dive on Cole Palmer at that point. I think the other thing that maybe you might want to consider is the fact that because you have Martinelli, again, he's a great pick if he's starting games, but I just have a gut feeling he does get rotated in one of 14 to 16, and 15 probably feels like the most likely just through logic that he is a first choice player. So game week 14, game week 16 will probably get those 2, and game week 15 maybe get 30 minutes with Trossard starting that week. But you could carry him through that, or you could potentially look at moving Cole Palmer in that week, for instance. I think overall I'd probably do Mbumo first, sort the bench out ahead of game week 15, and then maybe Palmer in 16 though.
Yeah, it's a bit unsexy, isn't it? But I suppose, doing a move like even the Lascelles in, to be honest, because they've got Everton at home. Sorry, Everton away, I think. It's away, I think, in 15.
Yeah, it is,
and then 17 and 18 are quite good, aren't they? It's Fulham and Sheffield United, Luton.
Fulham, Luton, Nottingham Forest.
So maybe I'd do that. I mean, would you, if you were as a Shimikas owner as well, without Lascelles, would you be kind of minded? I'm sure those people are in the same situation. Would you be minded to be moving a Kabore out for Shimikas? Sorry, for Lascelles, assuming that he's probably kind of the cheapest sort of option to do a job for you, or would you be kind of looking at Shimikas just cutting and running now on him?
Yeah, I've actually got a bit scared about Lascelles over the international break through the news about Botman. Potentially his injury isn't as bad as we all first thought. Maybe he comes back into the fold slightly sooner than we anticipated. So Lascelles could be a problem in a few game weeks' time. I still don't expect them to rush Botman in. But Lascelles might not have that longevity to get him through to game week 17, right, for instance. So maybe if you're desperate, then that game week 15 fixture could still be a good time to have him just for that 1 week. But then make sure you've got a plan to not need to start him from game week 17 to 19, because I'm personally, as a Lascelles owner, a little bit worried now that I might have put myself in a position to need a transfer out at some point in the next few game weeks. So I wouldn't say he's a massive priority. I think the only thing going for him is the fact that for the time being, he's a 90-minute man, and it will keep starting until Botman's back.
Oh God! Well, Timmy Castagna, come on down.
Yeah.
Nottingham Forest at home, West Ham at home, and yeah, okay. What one for future Tom to deal with there? No, I appreciate that. Thank you for. Yeah, I do think you're right. My bench is probably a bit too weak. Taylor, the fixtures are all right, but Kabore, the fixtures are not, and he's probably not as nailed as Taylor is. Although who knows? Right, should we look at your team? Exalting how much better planned you are than I am, that's for sure. I think you're definitely shaping up a little better, aren't you?
I think for the time being, although it is worth noting, for all that better planning in inverted commas, I'm 200k behind you. So I think you're being slightly modest there. Lascelles is in the starting 11 this week as it stands, which again is probably not ideal against Chelsea at home. I'd expect them to concede in that game. There are a couple of flags that have come in that aren't appearing here just because I took the screenshot back when we did the previous pod. Bowen and Haaland are the two yellows at the moment. I do expect them both to clear, but I've got one free transfer. If Bowen is confirmed out this game week, I've got two options. I can either just start Archer against Bournemouth at home, or I could make that move early on Mbumo. And out of those two options, because I'm 99.9% convinced that I'd be making the Mbumo move next week anyway, I might as well just bring that forward a week. And I actually still back him to do well against Arsenal, or more likely to do well against Arsenal than Archer is to score against anyone ever. Although this week is as good a chance as any for him to return, which I'll kind of hint at for later on. But yeah, I think I just don't have quite enough faith in Archer to be starting him even against Bournemouth, when I could be going for someone who's on penalties, getting 90 minutes, who I want in my team long term anyway. But yeah, the three priorities that you mentioned, sorting the bench out a little bit, Lascelles might be an issue for me. Tsimikas potentially could be an issue. Palmer, which week to bring him in, and Mbumo are the three priorities for me at the moment as well. So I'll hand it back over to you. What order would you be doing them in?
Well, I think it sounds like we've come to an agreement that Mbumo in first is the way to go. Obviously, all fairly contingent on Bowen. I do think it's worth kind of just saying at the moment, if Bowen is fit, what happens there? Because I mean, because Bowen has been like really, really consistent. EPA review tells me sell Bowen for Mbumo next week. No brainer. Just don't worry about it because the underlying data is just so damn good. But you look at that and think, oh, actually, Bowen's been very, very consistent. And so maybe you'd be kind of questioning whether you want to sell, especially, Palace at home is it's decent enough for Bowen. Spurs, Fulham, Wolves. If he is fit, is going to play all of those games.
Yeah.
So what's the alternative for you? I've got no idea what the alternative would be for me. Honestly, I think it would be selling Ben White. I think it would be kind of doing something fairly questionable for you. Well, maybe I would sell Martinelli, maybe based on what you were saying earlier on. But for you, you've got Saka in there. You've got you're not going to be looking to sell him, or so I'd be kind of more open selling Martinelli. That defense seems pretty solid. I mean, you're not going to be selling Saliba on. You're probably not going to be selling Cash on. Probably not at the moment to upgrade Gordon. So you start to get into a situation where you're looking to make a bit of a big sale, aren't you? Really?
I am. I don't know if you remember what my initial plan was going into this week or not.
I do. That's why I'm. I do. That's why I'm
Right.
asking.
Okay.
You
It
to
was a
vocalise
leading
it.
question. Okay. Good. So yeah, if Bowen is injured, then that actually resolves a little bit of a dilemma I was having, and I could just move him out. If he is fit, I think he's a good hold for the next few weeks. He'll get 90 minutes. The data's good. So I'd probably keep him and not buy Mbumo for him. The player that I'd probably be sacrificing for Mbumo next week, rather not this week, but next week, would be Son Heung-min, and that would be questionable to say the least. But I've got a pretty decent idea of what I would do with the funds as well. So I'd be looking next week with 2 free transfers at moving out Gordon and Son for Mbuemo and Palmer, saving a lot of money there. In fact, it would be enough money to help me upgrade one of my defensive issues all the way up to Trippier ahead of when the games turn good for Newcastle again. And again, he doesn't look like a player who's getting rested or rotated at all at the moment. Even at the start of the season, we thought he might lose a few minutes to Livramento. That just doesn't seem to be happening whatsoever, especially with how thin Newcastle are on the ground at the moment. They need to play him. So Trippier could be funded, even upgrading the cells, which could be an issue in a few game weeks' time. I'll need that money. So selling Son, who is missing his chief creator, he'll still tick over. I said this to you in messages over the previous week. It's not like I don't expect him to do all right. It's just whether or not I expect him to match up to what Mbumo can do in the next few weeks, plus what that extra 2.5 million can get me elsewhere. And in my case, the 2 moves that I'd be doing would be 2 penalty takers in for Gordon, who out of position up front recently hasn't looked great. He'll probably be back on the left wing with Isaac coming back in. But Newcastle's fixtures for Gordon, I'm not sure that they're that amazing compared to Chelsea's in the next few. So I'd probably prefer Palmer over Gordon. And Mbumo maybe even matches Son in the next stretch, with Spurs struggling a little bit for creativity without Maddison. And Son as well is a player that has been consistently struggling with seemingly some sort of injury every single week since the season began. And 14 to 16, we haven't really mentioned it so far, but I wouldn't be massively shocked if he gets benched in 15, and it just gets 30 minutes at the end or something. It wouldn't be a huge surprise, or for him to get taken off at 65 minutes in 2 of those 3 games, which might also be fine, but still, it's reduced minutes, and I'd expect Mbuemo to be getting 90 in all of them. And for what I could do elsewhere with that money, that might be the route I take. Son's data has dropped off a little bit since Maddison's been out of the team. They didn't look themselves at all against Wolves. He'll get a goal every other game, I'm sure. But I also think Mbuemo will get a goal every other game over the next few. So that could be my strategy if Bowen is fit. Obviously, if he's injured, then we can forget all about that and pretend I never came up with something so stupid. But that might be where I'm looking if Bowen is fit this week.
Do you know a fun fact?
Yeah, go on.
Cole Palmer and Mbumo are both ahead of Son in terms of non-pen XGI per 90.
Beautiful.
So, some sweet confirmation bias for you there.
That's all I needed to hear.
Yeah, I think with Son, it's all about the X starts, isn't it? It's not really about the X mins, because we know that there's going to be a slight consideration for the fact that he's not going to, with the issue that seems to have been kind of ongoing during the South Korea game, the last one, there was a spread like wildfire around Twitter that he was limping, and then 20 minutes later it spread like wildfire again around Twitter. He was absolutely fine. And said, I might be I think he said in the media, I might be a bit hurt, but I don't care. Like, it's the national team, I'll do what I need to do. But it's certainly one that needs to be monitored, that's for sure. And I think it's just really kind of ironic that you're basically doing the opposite of what I did in terms of selling Trippier to get Son back. You'll be selling Son to get Trippier back, or you never had Trippier, did you? So you'll be getting Trippier for that.
I did have Trippier. I did before I wildcarded.
Right. Yes. Okay. Fine. I mean, it's definitely I feel you're kind of in a different position for me because you don't really need to worry too much about sorting out the bench. Because yes, all right, Botman could be fit fairly soon. But you're probably going to be all right for the next little while. You've got enough there to make it work. Obviously that depends on Shimikas and Lascelles all both kind of being sort of available. So it completely makes sense to be buying in Palmer and Mbumo for those two players, and then kind of messing around with the money. It might be that you don't get Trippier, maybe you do something else. Maybe you kind of go for 3-4-3 or something like that and kind of upgrade Archer. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's just, yeah, I mean, it's the Son fear factor almost.
Yeah.
Because I mean, yes, okay, he may kind of be playing net 60 over the next little while, but they've got 4 home games in the next 6. Yes, there's a Man City game in 14, which is probably going to be loads of people's precursor, the fig leaf that you put over the decision to sell. But 4 home games in the next 6. In game week 18 as well, the week with the Man City blank, they've got Everton at home. So again, that could be the one that loads of people do look at as a potential captaincy option if you aren't captaining Ollie Watkins. I think it is the other potential option in that week. I can't remember. I think Liverpool and Arsenal
Sheffield
play each
United
other
at home for him. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's definitely a bit of exposure there, I suppose, to quite a big EO sort of level. So I think maybe it is one for future Sam to really ruminate on. It would be a very risky move for you.
Yeah, it would be very
even
unlikely.
though even though your reasoning is very sound. I just maybe kind of say just look at my example as a bit of a cautionary tale that it is very difficult to get back in, although there is kind of the Asian Cup coming up in the same time that AFCON's coming up. So it might just be the case that you kind of think, right, I'm getting off now. You've got another week with the Villa game where we are expecting goals, so maybe that will be kind of the way you go. But yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense to be doing that. Obviously we need to just watch and wait, see what happens and where you go with that in the game week in game week 14. I will I be surprised if you do that? Yes, I would. I would.
I won't let that affect my decision making. I won't let you influence me.
You definitely shouldn't. And I would love you to sell Son, to be honest, just because it would mean even more points for me over you. Right, okay, let's move on to the bold claims then for this week. And last week I was close. Nunez Hall versus Brentford. Goal disallowed, really annoying. But yeah, there we go. And you were so close to the 2-pointer of 3+ goals for Arsenal, Villa, and Brighton. Just let down, weren't you, by the Seagulls being a bit ineffectual?
Yeah, I mean, they could have scored 3. It was very unlucky. I felt hard done by Arsenal, obviously coming in, and then Villa also performing really well. Yeah, it was unlucky not to get Brighton to get that over the line, but it was a 2-pointer for a reason. It was always going to be difficult to hit all 3 with 3+ goals. So we'll move on. I think I'm still 2-0 up, but neither of us have scored any bold claims in quite a few weeks now. So we've both gone for maybe slightly less bold claims this week, but I still think it, beige-ish, lemon and herb of bold claim world. So my bold claim for this week is Archer and Solanke both to return in their fixture. So Sheffield United against Bournemouth. Right. Archer, I don't really ever back to do anything much, to be honest, but I think this is as good a week as any for Sheffield United and for Archer to get something. And Solanke is obviously looking very sharp at the moment as well. So for them both to return is my bold claim this week.
Great. And for me, it's 4+ goals in Spurs Villa. Comedically high line for Spurs, obviously, in the Chelsea game versus Villa, notorious for playing a very similar sort of system. It'll be a very open game, should be a very kind of exciting game outside of El Clasico, the UK version. I think that would be the game that I really want to watch this week. So I'm sure there's going to be loads of goals in that one. I think it is on the Sunday, isn't it? That one.
I think so.
That'll be the game, the 2:00 game that I'll be kind of wanting to watch this weekend as a non-TNT Sports subscriber. But I will, yeah, I might use internet sources that you probably shouldn't to watch the El Clasico. Great. Okay, questions this week then. The ones from last week kept them chill to come back to this week. The first one though did come in from somewhere else from my Slack. Chris asked, with the injury news coming in over the break and social media losing their heads at times, someone was injured, then he wasn't. How do you approach news we receive international break? And also Haaland, he can't be injured, right? I mean, Sam, I think you answered this sort of a little bit earlier on, so I think it's probably just left to me to reiterate very quickly that take it with a pinch of salt. Like, people are bored. People are kind of taking lots of links from all sorts of accounts they've never even heard of before. In Son's case, writing in Korean as well, and using the translate button. And I think it's probably just worth, like, chilling out, leaving it, not really being too worried about it, because I think you can kind of be trying to fill the gap, fill the hole that FPL's absence sort of creates by following all these things. But we just can't really know effectively. And even obviously there's questions about press conferences, how useful they actually are, but I mean it's not worth getting too worried about, honestly. And the Haaland, I mean, if he misses Liverpool, I think that I don't think he'll play at all, frankly. I think he'll be actually injured. That's the only way I can see Haaland not playing that game, basically. Not so much more to add. Right, next question. Dave C said, FPL, what's going on with goalkeepers? Are any worth a transfer in, especially because Ariola's a bit rubbish? And Luke says, Onana, Johnson, Pope, and Allison are all doing well. But I think there is one player going forward, one goalkeeper going forward, who we've both sort of got our eyes on, right, Sam? With good fixtures coming up for this team. We mentioned them earlier.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping we're about to mention the same team. But yeah, Sanchez, from 16 onwards, I think could be a fantastic keeper to own. He's good on the bonus points as well. So shout out to Above Average, did a fantastic podcast on and YouTube show on the bonus points so far, and Sanchez is actually ranking pretty well on those. So if they start keeping those clean sheets, he's getting a few save points, and he could easily be in the bonus too. So he's still great value for money. Not one of the 5 million keepers either. I think he's still at 4.5. It might be 4.6 by now. I'm not sure if he's had
4.6 now. Yeah,
4.6. Still great value for money. If you've got a spare transfer and you're a bit bored, not really sure what else to do with it, and you've got Areola and Turner as a combo, bit of money in the bank, then that is a pretty easy move to make at some point in the next few game weeks. But again, West Ham's fixtures are good. They have only kept 1 clean sheet so far this season, but if they're going to keep another one, it will probably come in the next 5. So I don't think we need to rush it. I think there are more high priority moves to make elsewhere.
Yeah.
But if you've got nothing to do, then that could be somewhere that you could make a little bit of ground up and gain a few extra points over the stretch.
Yeah, as mentioned last week, West Ham 17th for the XGC, which is obviously not great at all. No. But nonetheless, you probably were right. The main selling point for me, Sam, for Sanchez, as we discussed on chat last week, was that you'd be looking at your Reece Jameses, your Cole Wills, etc., etc. But as players come back fit into that Chelsea team, it may become, especially over Christmas, when next kind of 4 weeks aside, over Christmas as well, it's incredibly congested. We'll speak about the FPL General when he comes on. But at least Sanchez offers you that sort of staying power that when the fixtures are good, you're not sure who else is going to play him in defence. Just shove the goalkeeper in. We'll be bored of Areola by then. We're all attention patience is already becoming frayed with Areola. So I think Sanchez is probably the one that I'd be kind of looking at. I wouldn't make him a transfer, same as you, Sam, for the short while, because there are other bigger fish to fry unless you are really, really on the trend. Your team is just amazingly template. You've got everything sort of covered. Maybe you wildcarded this week, in which case I'll probably get Sanchez in, or wildcarded last week and kept Areola. But I think that's kind of one that I'd have my eye on going forward. I mean, Luke's mentioned Onana, Johnston, Pope, Allison. Fair play. A bit more expensive, 3 of them. Johnston, fine, but that really difficult fixture on for Palace is going to come. So I think Sanchez kind of is the one that I'd be looking at kind of in the future. And you're right, yeah, the bonus is very good, as our friends at Above Average always said. Next one, FPL Crusader. Is it time to sell the likes of Trippier, who you are looking to buy, and cash? I mean, I think that there's definitely been a little bit of a walk back on Trippier. Yes, there was a 9-pointer a couple of weeks ago, but that has also been sort of sandwiched by a donut against Wolves and a 1-pointer versus Bournemouth, a kind of tired looking Newcastle who really needed the IB. We'll see what happens going forward. And Cash as well is the kind of the fag end really of Villa's fixtures, good fixtures. There's Bournemouth in 14, and then after that they run into City and Arsenal and then Brentford between 15 and 17. And there's the 18 fixture in Sheffield United, which means you probably would sell, would keep him for that. But I think both of those players, there's maybe an argument to sell and repurpose the cash. No, obviously, I don't mean Matt Cash, but repurpose the money. I mean, I don't know. I think cash is one that I would definitely kind of consider selling if I needed a bit of spare resource, Sam. But you're looking to buy Trippier.
Yeah, so it's important that I really map out my priorities here with Trippier. I definitely wouldn't buy him this week. I probably wouldn't buy him next week either, but he would be a planned transfer around game week 17-ish. So I wouldn't be doing it now. And if you've got him now and you think that you can find upside elsewhere for the next 3 or 4 weeks, whilst the fixtures don't look fantastic for Newcastle, maybe you could sell him. However, as I already don't have him, I'm now looking ahead a few game weeks in the future and thinking, is there a way that I could bring him back in for the good run that's coming just around the next corner? So for the time being, I certainly wouldn't be jumping on him now, but maybe at some point in the future. I probably also wouldn't sell him at this point either, especially knowing that the money that I would save by removing Trippier, where is that going to go elsewhere in my side right now? Unless you're going with or have gone without the likes of Salah or Haaland so far, and you want to put money into buying one of them, there's not really that many massive upgrades that you need to make in your side if you've kept anywhere near the template recently. And the main reason I repurposed the Trippier money when I wildcarded was to enable Son, who might be going slightly off the boil at the moment. So I don't think it's a massive priority buy to get to Son. So I don't think you necessarily need to sell Trippier, but at the same time, he's not the most attractive pick in your side right now. I completely get that. But if you can hold on to him for the next patch of fixtures, again, in game week 17 onwards, I would say he's a very attractive prospect. So it kind of just swings all the way back around to the point where he's actually probably a really good own again in a few game weeks' time. So I probably wouldn't sell him now unless you absolutely had to. Cash, on the other hand, I think, again, he might survive the chop for both of us based on the fact that we've got other defensive issues to sort out first. But I think in an ideal world, if there were loads of other defenders available that were attractive, then we'd probably be looking at selling him pretty soon, probably after the Bournemouth game next week. Is it Bournemouth next week for them? Yeah, it is. 14 against Bournemouth away from home. Probably after that, I would be looking at shipping him off. Right. But for the time being, I think you can probably hold him against Tottenham and Bournemouth.
Yeah, I think with Cash as well, there's also been a bit of a change in his role, or at least a change in his sort of threat over the last few weeks. I think he's in top 40 or something like that for non-pin SGI, which is pretty decent for a defender. Is he top 40 or maybe top 60? I looked at it before the pod. But I don't know. I think it definitely comes down to kind of the essence of what you were saying is that we've got other things, other priorities to sort of deal with. And he definitely becomes vulnerable to a sale. I think it's fair to say after the Bournemouth game with the City and Arsenal fixtures in 15 and 16, like you don't want that. You don't want to be playing a defender in that, no matter what. If it was Trent, then fine. Is Cash at the same level as that? Are the fixtures move the same? Are Villa going to set up in the same way Liverpool will for those games? No. So he could actually be quite close to the chop for me compared to you. But it really depends on what happens this week. If I roll a transfer this week, I think that he will definitely kind of be a player that I'd be looking at selling pretty soon. If I don't roll a transfer this week, I'm going to have to kind of hold him for a little while because I think I'm going to have other things to do. We spoke about the kind of refreshing the bench. But I'm still going to have them be in a kind of a bit of a horrible situation where I'm going to be contemplating playing Matt Cash in game week 15 against Man City at home, and also playing him in game week 16 against Arsenal at home. So if you're in a situation like me with the Kabore Taylor kind of duo on the bench, then maybe it does become a bit more of an issue. Even if he is getting the 90s, they're not going to be good 90s. Right? You were not kind of expecting more. You're basically playing a 0-pointer in loads of ways, even though kind of there is kind of a slight attacking threat, and that may happen. He is a bit more of a worry for me than his view potentially, Sam. So I think he is closer to the chop for me. Really, and it may be that the likes of Castagna, as I said, do come on down for 14 and 15, because getting that kind of 0.5 out and just doing something with that money does seem that kind of way of doing it. You're right on Trippier though. Like if you've owned this long, and especially if you've owned them to 6.5, you've got quite a lot of selling value in there. If it really does, if it's mission critical, you're looking to get Salah in, or you're looking to kind of buy Haaland back for the Luton game in a couple of weeks, then yeah, it makes a lot of sense to be selling Trippier. But if you can hold, I'd hold at the moment, because yeah, he's part of Newcastle's best team without Gordon Lilly too far. I think he's one of the best creators as well, and I think that's going to be really important. Next question. We've kind of slightly answered this already in terms of what Sam was talking about earlier on. Fruki50, what to do with Son, a non-Haaland owner here, and he's my route back. So yeah, Son for Sam's expendable. For me, I'm not as sure because of those home games that I cited. But if you were a non-Haaland owner, Sam, and Son was your way to him, Liverpool home, Spurs home, Villa away, and Luton away, the Spurs, Villa, and Luton games being the 14 to 16, with a dodgy ankle. I mean, is that going to be something that you'd be considering doing if you're going to put yourself in the shoes of a non-Haaland owner?
Yeah, I'd do it in a heartbeat, 100%. I wouldn't even hesitate. As long as Haaland is confirmed fit for this week, he's one of the most important players to own in this game at the moment. He's on fire at the moment as well, and he's probably the favoured captaincy option this week, even though Son has got arguably a better fixture. I would be looking at removing Son, given the circumstances we mapped out earlier, to get Haaland. I wouldn't be removing Son for anyone else this week. But next week onwards, I think in my side, he could potentially be a make weight. For this week only, I would say Haaland is probably the only player I would be like, yeah, get rid of Son, because Haaland is just fundamentally a more important pick to have right now. But yeah, that's just me. I prioritize Haaland over any other player really as it stands, and I think he could be a really good captaincy option this week, even more so than Son.
I think it's interesting how it swung with Haaland, because the initial sale was around game week 7, game week 8, wasn't it, for Haaland?
Yeah, it was very popular on the game week 8 wild card, yeah.
And then we had the against the Brighton, the 1 goal, the 2 bonus, and Salah more than matched him that week. I think he definitely outdid him in game week 9, was it, against Everton? And then the last kind of few weeks, Haaland has kind of bit back really among against sellers. And if he is fit, you're right. Like we got a few kind of people questioning. Yeah, you seem a bit kind of devoted to Haaland in some ways, but the fact is that, like Salah, he is just FPL inevitable almost. And I like what you said really there about, if you're selling for Haaland, then I can kind of justify it. If you're selling for anyone else, it probably isn't a sell. And that'll be something that you have to think about, I suppose, and next week, if you're kind of selling something for other players. But I think that this week, especially if he is fit, playing against Liverpool, I think those are the sort of games that you kind of want to hold them for. And I don't find it particularly worrying. I know there's people point to Spurs and Villa being worrying fixtures, but as discussed in my bold claim this week, neither of those teams worry me about Haaland. Like, I think Haaland's still in with a shout for a captaincy next week against Spurs at home. Even against Villa, he's in with a shout, and he doesn't get rotated that much. Honestly, it's just if he's injured. That's the only reason that we probably see some form of rotation for him. And Alvarez has, I think he's playing. I think he's playing Brazil actually tomorrow. So maybe we'll. You might be saying, "Oh, Alvarez can play the Liverpool game at so and so." Nah. Unless he's really, really injured, I'm not worried at all. So yeah, I agree with you there. Yeah, if you got, I think I'd do it for free though. I'm not sure I'll take a hit to get Haaland back and sell Son in the Villa game.
Yeah, maybe not quite for a hit this week.
No,
because Son's still got a good fixture this week. I think for a hit might be a bit rich for my blood, but yeah, anything for free, I would do it.
Cool, fair play. FPL Gem variance has been crazy this season. Would you count 100k as a good season in the end? I think it means from top 100k. So what's that? A 5-figure rank? Yeah, we have a running joke about 9-figure rank. Yeah. Anyway, I mean, I think any season now, top 100k is a good rank. Honestly, I'm not saying that as somebody who has had a few crap ranks in the last little while, so trying to justify himself. Obviously, the top 10k is where you want to be, but you need more luck than you ever did before to get there, luck variance, whatever. And I think that with the engaged core of managers expanding, it's expanding year after year. We're seeing more and more people, even though the casuals still fall off, we're still seeing more and more people every year playing through to the end. And I experienced that, be it in friend groups, people who got into it in the pandemic, who are now really into it, asking me for advice, or at least kind of telling me what Chaz and Mark's on Black Box, and do I agree? And at work as well, in the work leagues, loads of people around the coffee area, asking me questions, and not in the start of the season, like towards the end of the season, people are still playing, which I never saw before. Like, you have people who are kind of like, "Oh yeah, I'm playing FPL this year, I'm really interested," and then kind of come November around this sort of time, we'll see some drop off this time. Around this time, that's for sure. All it takes is one or two game weeks where you forget about it, and he messes you up, and you think, "Oh, screw it, I'm not going to play anymore." But even around this time, there's more engaged people than ever before, and I think that the days of getting top 10Ks for players who were active in 2012, 2013, that's great and well done, but I wouldn't count that as anymore really as being particularly relevant, because of how the kind of the sample size has changed, and the sample universe has become a lot more expansive in terms of engaged managers, and the challenge is a lot harder. So getting top 100k, I think is great. Honestly, I think it's not quite the top 10k. I'd imagine that kind of top 50k is kind of the new top 10k, but 100k plus is a good season, really. Or at least I think if you have to slightly reframe what a top 10k was back in those days. Like, a top 10k now is probably a top 50k. Top 100k is still a good season. A 5-figure rank is a good season, I'd say. Is that about right?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think I put something out. I think it was in response to Focal's unpopular FPL opinions or something like that. And I was basically saying, realistically, we should be measuring FPL performance based on percentages as part of the game, rather than on a final figure rank. So saying your top 10k or top 100k, that is interpreted differently by whichever season you're relating to. If you're talking about 10 years ago, top 10k is far less impressive than if it was this season, when there are 10 million players playing. You're now in the top 0.1%, rather than maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when there were 1 million or less players, then you'd have only been in the top 1%. So I think top 10k, because of the history behind that number, for anyone who's been playing FPL for a long time, is always going to hold that value. And I'm always going to want top 10k. Everyone loves getting that. But top 100k is getting harder and harder to reach every single year, because there are every year more and more engaged managers proportionally going up as the overall number of FPL players goes up. And I would say, if you're in the top 1% of all managers, which would be top 100k this year, considering there's 10 million players. I think that's a very good season. I wouldn't put that down as phenomenal. I'd leave that for top 10k, just because it holds that special place in a lot of FPL managers' minds. But 100k, I'd be very happy with most seasons now. And I think anyone listening probably could be quite pleased with a top 100k finish any season where there's 10 million managers playing the game.
Yeah. I think this like the sound way of playing, which is more, you're more of a disciple of it than I am, of kind of just being calm, collected, FPL general sort of style, making solid moves, relaxing until the deadline, making your decisions then, not being panicked, patience with your players, etc., etc. All these things just set you apart from your sort of classically non-engaged manager. There are a few things which I do like to do because my risk appetite is a little bit higher, which is not paid off in the past. Last year I did kind of subscribe to that and I did well, but I didn't enjoy it. So there you go. But I think you definitely have kind of all the tools available to you now, be it for us, be it through whoever you listen to, whatever content you consume, to get you to around that sort of level, and the rest of it just depends on luck. And as you said, Sam, if you have a phenomenal season, that is where you get your captain differential one week absolutely pops off. So us versus Salah versus Brighton for us this year would be a good example of that, when the others didn't do anything and Salah goes off and gets 15 points, so 30 points for us, or have differential and that goes off for you. And those little things are the things that add up at the end of the day to getting you there. And that is down to variance, that is down to luck. But 'twas ever thus. It's just that now there's more people who are also going to be getting lucky because of the engaged core being that little bit higher. And agree with you completely there, Sam. Well put. All right, final question this week, leading us into transfers and captains. So we've done our transfers already, so we'll just do captains here. But Kitan Chopra, has this game been relegated to just choosing the right captain? I know there are a few individuals who are a little bit sort of miffed last week, captaining Saka, for example, against Burnley, which is a completely reasonable thing to do. But then you had Salah and Haaland going off and kind of making a mockery of perhaps your choice if you didn't have the rest of your team going forward, and putting a performance in, which meant that you got a decent-ish red arrow, sadly. Has this game been relegated to choosing the right captain? For me, I think it always has been kind of that, to be honest. But I think the wider consciousness around effective ownership has again also been something which has fed into that, because more people being aware of EO has meant that more people are being safe with their captaincy, and going outside of kind of choosing the right captain or choosing the most popular captain is probably another way of looking at it. And before, the hindsight is where the right captain kind of diagnosis comes in. But before that, it comes down to the popular captain and what's going to hurt me less. Where's my exposure? Is this exposure going to be lower with this captain? So I think a lot of the time, yes, it is relegated to kind of thinking, captaincy is random in a lot of ways, but it also kind of hurts you the most if you get it wrong. So you might as well just think, right, I can control that through just going with a popular captain this week, and then the rest of my team sort of comes forward. And we spoke a few weeks ago about effective ownership and our views on it and captaincy, and does it mean that you kind of go into the game week therefore with 10 players? Does it mean the ownerships are kind of spread around? Got slightly different views on that. But I mean, I think 'twas ever thus a little bit. And if you do take a risk with your captain, it's now magnified because you know what that risk is, or you have a good idea of what the risk is going to be, and that will come through on live FPL or FPL game week the week after, during the week, of just how much risk I'm taking. And if it goes wrong, you can't really have too many complaints, honestly, because if it goes right, you're a genius. If it goes wrong, as long as the process is there, it's fine, basically.
With captaincy, it's if you want to go against the most popular captain, it's a case of live by the sword, die by the sword. Like, if you're going to back against it, you have to be fairly confident in your decision-making process. And I wouldn't say necessarily the game has been relegated to this being the only factor. I would just say it's the most important factor of a number of others. There are effectively, again, we won't go into the specifics of it because we covered it on another pod, but if we go by the Bible that is live FPL at the moment, there are effectively 12 players, not 11, in your starting lineup. That 12th player is you doubling up on the points of one of your players, so your captain, in other words, which means that player is twice as important to your team score as any other player in your starting 11. So getting that decision right is twice as important as it is getting any other player in that starting 11 correct. That doesn't mean it's the only decision to make. You need to get the edge pieces correct as well, and you need to get the balance right. But it is probably, unquestionably, in fact, the most important of those several decisions you have to make week in, week out. And it will have more of an impact on your overall performance and score and rank than all of the other less significant decisions will over the season.
Yeah, definitely. It's one of those where maybe the excitement factor in a lot of game weeks is gone because like you know what you got to do, just to preserve the bottom line, make sure your floor is fine, and then the rest of it is all about ceiling. Your differentials are all about the ceiling, or at least your entire team. The idea of compound differentials is all now about the ceiling, and I think maybe that's just kind of something you got to accept. But FPL, it's not the case anymore, where you kind of every given week you're going to have player A versus player B. At the moment, it's just about player A, and if you go against it, then you know what you're doing effectively. I think that nicely kind of leads us on to our kind of captaincy picks this week. We spoke about transfers already. I think we don't have to kind of go through both our teams again, but we're both on Haaland captain. See, it depends on the fitness of Erling Haaland. But as I said earlier on, I think if he does miss this game, it's kind of going to be that he's going to miss it entirely. I can't see him being brought on or something like that. No Bowen. If Bowen's fit again, I can see him being a decent sort of vice captaincy pick. Although interestingly, there's a few sort of resources like FPL Review who do kind of see Son as being a viable pick here, Sam, as well. I mean, for me, I put it on Haaland straight away. I know he's the first in the first game. It doesn't bother me at all. I don't care about that kind of whole nonsense about Gandhi, etc., etc., etc. Yeah, it's a bit of a. Yeah, I mean, I think you'll probably see FPL like analytics kind of engaged managers putting it on Son, but it does feel like it's Haaland for me, at least, especially when you're kind of layering in as well the effective ownership.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything against Son as a captaincy pick this week. I just think Haaland, if fit, is better. Liverpool still do concede enough chances. That game is also usually quite high octane, high entertainment, and high scoring more often than not in the Pep Klopp era. So I'd expect Haaland to hopefully do quite well in that. Although I don't think he's got the best record against Liverpool thus far. So I think he'd be breaking a little bit of a duck there if I'm right in saying that. I'm not as confident as I was earlier this week in claiming this, but I'm not sure he's actually scored against Liverpool yet. So this might be breaking his duck completely in terms of goal scoring. I'll have to double check that after the pod in case I've said something.
I mean, it's only 2 games, isn't it?
Well, there was also the Community Shield, so 3
at least. True.
So I think, which for Haaland is quite a big deal because he usually scores against absolutely everyone. In fact, I think I saw a graphic where he's only not scored against 2 of the Premier League clubs he's played so far, and he's only halfway through his second season, which is absolutely mad. But yeah, I think for me, he's the best captaincy option. He'll either play and start or not play at all, in my mind, just like you said. I think Son or Salah would probably be decent captaincy options as well. Bowen could easily come into it. I think it's one of those 4. Haaland is the standout pick for me, and then Vice could easily be any one of those 3 at this point. I'd probably just about go with Salah just for safety, I guess, because I know how reliable he is. But yeah, any one of those 3 as the Vice, just in case Haaland doesn't play. If
any question marks emerge about Haaland, are you directly on to Salah, or are you interested in Son?
I'm interested in Son. I'd have to give it some more thought. as I'm sure this podcast has kind of unearthed, I'm a little bit hesitant on him and Spurs without Maddison and with other injuries elsewhere as well. So I'm not sure I'm as confident as I would have been if Maddison was still in the starting lineup at the moment. But I could be tempted with the home fixture, especially that Aston Villa game is quite suited to the way that Son likes to run in behind. Aston Villa press high. They'll have a very high line and they do concede almost every single week. So I could be tempted into Son. I'd have to look more into the data in the last few days leading up to it. But yeah, it would likely be Son or Salah, probably just about favouring Salah as it stands. But I'll do some research.
I'm the same. I think if it did transpire that Holland was a bit of a doubt, I think I would throw it on Salah, basically.
Yeah. Almost as an instinct.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say no to Son either. I can see why FPL Review is favouring Son, but as you've mentioned, losing the players that meant that Son is such an option is going to be a really kind of huge downside for Son's candidacy. So Salah probably the one, especially I think he scored 4 goals, didn't he, against Djibouti? So
yeah,
in red hot form, old Mo Salah.
Man City maybe slightly more difficult. I'm not sure.
Man City, Djibouti. I mean, yes.
Although they also conceded 4 last time, so.
Yeah, exactly. The defense is non-essential. It doesn't matter. Well, on that bombshell, I think it's a good time to end.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you all so much for listening. Again, it's been a long one. So you've been treated to, I think, 180 minutes worth of WGTA over the international break. So hopefully you've enjoyed it all. As always, we have been Who Got the Assist. You can find us on X at WGTA_FPL or myself at FPL Pricey. And again, on Instagram or Threads, you can find us at WGTA.FPL or FPL Pricey on there as well. If you did enjoy the pod, we'd really appreciate it. First off, if you could follow us on those channels, but also give the pod a 5-star rating if you're listening on Spotify, iTunes, wherever really. Of course, if you're also watching on YouTube, then we'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Again, that's really, really helpful for us.
360 minutes over the international break, Sam, if you've watched both of these or listened to both of these. But hey, there we go. We hope you enjoyed the pod. Really looking forward to FPL coming back now. We're both saying earlier on, we're really refreshed. We're ready to go. I'm sure that's been echoed in our enthusiasm today. We hope we assist you look ahead to the hectic period coming up. We'll speak to you next week, or maybe earlier if there's a huge injury. Either way, goodbye for now.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?